As many can attest, conflict can greatly impact an interpersonal relationship. But what is conflict? How would we define it? What is its nature? It's an expressed struggle. We typically perceive incompatible goals. There's a perceived scarce amount of resources, and that resource could be as simple as time. Interdependent nature amongst the two within the relationship. So I depend on you and you depend on me. And then a potential expression of interference from the other party. You want something and their desires are interfering with yours. That's the basic nature of conflict. But in addition, conflict is natural. We always see the term conflict as this bad thing, but in many cases, it can be beneficial. If you don't address incongruencies, if you don't address issues, then it just builds to a very negative outcome. So some conflict done in some ways can be very beneficial, and it's all natural. It's normal for people to experience conflict. But what are some of the conflict styles? How do people tend to manage conflict? In some cases, we avoid it. It's lose-lose. I don't want to deal with it, and I don't want you to try and deal with it either. I just want to avoid the conflict. Now, some say that that is a horrible way to manage conflict, and in many cases it is. But in some cases, it's appropriate because it allows you time to relax and reduce the level of anxiety or anger that you're experiencing so that you can address the conflict in a more appropriate manner. Another type is accommodating, where I lose, but that makes you win. This is one where often people get stepped on. So you feel like you just don't want to fight about it. And in some cases, that's okay. It depends on the conflict. But in many cases, accommodating can be quite detrimental, not only to the relationship in general, but to yourself. You may become angry or bitter, but you're the one choosing to be accommodating. So maybe accommodating is one that you've tried before. Another one is competing. That is win-lose. It's the opposite of accommodating. I want to win and I want to make sure you lose. Now, that can come in a couple of different ways. One is direct aggression. So you are literally saying you're going to lose. You are literally making it happen. And some ways are passive aggression. And that's where you act in a certain way, or you do certain things or say certain things in order to get what you want, but it's not a direct statement. Oftentimes you hear passive aggressive behavior or just passive behavior that allows for a competing style to prevail. Another one is compromising, partial lose-lose. And why didn't I say partial win-win? Because while you will get something, you will always have to give up something in compromising. So there is a win-win and a lose-lose here. Now, the one you want to shoot for is collaborating, and that's win-win. And we're going to talk about that in the lecture on conflict resolution stages and how you can sort of understand the possibilities of collaborating. Now, collaborating is difficult, and it's very time-consuming. So you have to be willing to put forth the effort and capable of giving the time needed to address the issue. Now, like I said, people sometimes think avoiding is a bad style to choose. In addition, there's many times when they think competing is a negative style to choose. But it's similar to an autocratic leadership style. If you need to make a decision and you need to make it now, quickly, or a tough decision that only you can make as a boss, for example, you're going to have to use a competing style on occasion. So it's not to say that any of one of these is the best way or the most appropriate way in every situation. While collaborating in many cases is the right choice, in some cases it's the absolute wrong choice, and instead competing may be necessary. You can kind of look at the conflict management styles as a sort of square that looks at things on a level of concern for self and concern for others, and they kind of overlap in that way. And you can see sort of how they meet once you do that. Now, in addition to conflict styles, the consideration that you need to keep into this idea of which style to use is one, what's the relationship like? Who is this person, and what type of relationship is this? Is it a coworker that you're only seeing on a conference trip? Or is it your significant other or your best friend or your parent or sibling or what have you? So how much does that relationship matter to you, and who are they in the grand scheme of things? Also consider the situation. Maybe they're going through some issues right now and they're just struggling and their situation is so rough that it's causing additional conflict. Or same for you. Consider the situation. It might be an emotional attack. It might be something that is out of confusion or frustration. So keep in mind that the situation can certainly impact how you manage conflict. In addition, consider the other person. What are their baseline conflict management styles? What do they typically do? Do they typically avoid? Do they typically compete? And if so, how can you adjust your behavior to either foster the appropriate behavior from them or help yourself to be more accommodating or collaborating or competitive if needed? And then in the end, consider your goals. If the goal is something that you're willing to give up on because it's not a big deal, say your goal is to go to this new salad bar for lunch and they want to go somewhere else, maybe it's not a big deal to you. You can let go of that for this time. But if your goal is something significant, to be treated better, for example, or to be given an opportunity, then you might consider your conflict management styles in different ways. All of these things should be taken into consideration when you decide how you're going to address a conflict. Now, one other thing to think of is how you come to the point where you're going to make a decision about your type of personality within conflict. Now, in general, we see two distinct types of personalities within conflict, and they tend to choose various conflict management styles. One is a very verbally aggressive person, often inflicting psychological pain by attacking the person's self-concept, using character attacks or degrading physical abilities or cussing and teasing, that kind of thing. Those are all verbally aggressive types of conflict or types of personality within conflict. So this person is going to often choose the competing style. And in that case, it may be appropriate depending upon the circumstance, but in many cases, if you have a combination of verbal aggressive person that consistently uses competing style, then there's an issue. And you'd have to learn to manage and come to grips with that. Now, another one is argumentativeness. That is another personality that actually often gets a negative viewpoint. We hear the word argumentative, and we automatically think connotation of that is a very bad thing. And in some cases it is. But in general, what we're actually saying here is your willingness to argue your point of view. Sometimes you're very, very willing to argue your point of view, almost too much so. And other times you're not even remotely willing to argue your point of view because you don't want to deal with the conflict. So it differs. Now, in order to increase effective argumentativeness, what should you do? Be objective, so try to look at things from multiple perspectives, never attack the other person. Reaffirm that other person's sense of confidence. I really like this. I think it's a great suggestion to say to them, I've always respected your perspective, and I want to make sure I understand it now. So here's what I'm worried about, and then give the information. Or I love how passionate you are. So reaffirm them. Let them know that you still care about them before you bring up your point of view so that they don't automatically go on the defensive. And then make sure to avoid interrupting, because interrupting alone can make a person feel like they are not involved, that they are not respected within the conflict. So while these are some personality traits that we tend to see in some people when they are within a relationship, each of these have their own issues, and you can assess yourself based on those issues to determine whether or not you are using your conflict management styles appropriately or inappropriately.